I've been quoted as saying in the past that if you live on a creek, you regard everybody up the creek from you with deep and abiding distrust, and everybody below you with complete indifference.
This lake is only fed by one creek, which is the Fiery Creek. And if the water doesn't come down there, there's no water in the lake. The whole town relies on the lake. When the water came back, the people came back. Everybody was happy, the businesses were doing well, everybody was, the farmers were happy. Now the water's going down again. People are slowly, drifting to the way they were before, thinking, oh, it's dry, it's going to stay dry for years, what are we going to do?
The creek itself set as a boundary, so it's where Wathaurung and Tjabwurrung meet. It's where there's a change of language, it's where there's a change of moieties, skin systems. It's also where there's a change of traditions and customs.
September 23rd, 1836. This morning's fog was succeeded by a fine warm day, and as we proceeded, we saw two women and their children at work separately on a swampy meadow, digging in the ground for roots. We travelled long within view before they observed us. All carried bags, and when Piper went towards them, they ran with great speed across the vast open plains to the southward. The ground was becoming almost hopelessly soft when we reached a small run of water from the hills, and by keeping along its bank, we had the good fortune to reach an extremity of the range where the solid granite was as welcome to our feet as a dry beach is to shipwrecked seamen. We were still, however, to cross the range at which we had arrived, and which not only extended southward, but also broke into bold ravines on the eastern side, being connected with some noble hills, or rather mountains, all grassy to their summits, thinly wooded and consisting wholly of granite. I named this hill Mount Cole.
With my swag all on my shoulder, Black Billy in my hand, I travelled the bush of Australia like a true-born native man. We steered our course for Portland town, then northwest to Ballarat, where some of us grew mighty thin, and some got sleek and fat. Some tried their luck at Bendigo and some at Fiery Creek. I made a fortune in a day, but I lost it in a week. With my swag all on my shoulder, Black Billy in my hand, I travelled the bush of Australia.
I think the Fiery Creek's changed a huge amount. It's beautiful, it is lovely and very nice to be able to work in a very nice environment that is pretty and all that. But in terms of upkeep and fence upkeep, and obviously the obvious one being flood, damage and all that sort of thing, it can involve some serious management.
In terms of running a farm, particularly when it was all livestock, it could be a considerable liability at times, because sheep particularly can get stuck in the creek before the creek was fenced off. On this place, about 1,500 acres goes under water when there is a flood. I had 8 floods in one winter, which meant that all the stock had to be taken off, and then the creek lays a sludge of silt and mud over the grass, which makes it unpalatable for stock for some weeks afterwards.
What we do impacts further downstream, and we have to accept that, whether we like it or lump it, and people downstream also have to accept that we have to make a living and live here too. But I think we do have to respect the fact that what we choose to do up in our little section of the creek does impact the community as a whole. The saying always is it's difficult to be green when you're in the red, and yeah, we have to sort of, every decision we make, whatever we spend money on, we have to weigh that up against, debt repayments or, whatever it might be.
Well, I agree with Edward 100%. It goes well down the line, and when other things are taking priority.
The CMA is trying to address the waterway health in the Fiery Creek catchment. The health overall is in probably an average state in most cases. There are some sections of really good vegetation, but those sections are relatively small. The upper reaches in particular were quite degraded. There's quite a lot of weed cover in those areas, and that's where we've had quite a lot of focus for works. We've obviously had a few people that we haven't been able to get on board or convince to do works, which would have been ideal. The main weeds in particular in those upper reaches were gorse and willows. We are trying to establish a regenerated creek system supporting as many vegetation types and habitats that we can possibly provide within the limitations that we are currently working within. And the main limitation being that once vegetation has gone into a degraded state, it is extremely hard to rehabilitate that to what it was, and which is very rarely ever possible. So looking for the best outcome possible is to revegetate, to rehabilitate, look after the areas that we've still got here which are in good condition.
Like the Fiery Creek is one of the first of three major stream systems in Tjabwurrung Country as you're heading west. It marks the boundary between Tjabwurrung and Wathaurung. I mean, these are permeable boundaries, of course. And yet, it doesn't seem to receive the attention as perhaps even the Hopkins. But
within our CMA area, the Fiery Creek and its catchment was, well, it was known, but nobody really cared about it much.
It used to flow regularly every year, and in fact it used to flow all the time. And, well, it just doesn't anymore.
In the 1982 drought it stopped flowing for about a month, but the entire course of the creek was full, whereas in this dry decades, the last 20 years, the creek stops flowing early in summer, and then the water in the holes drops quite quickly, and so you end up with a series of pools along the course of the creek. Now that wasn't ever the case in the 50s, 60s and 70s and 80s.
Unfortunately, as the lake's going down, our business has gone down heaps. Like for the last two Christmases, we've hardly had, we usually booked out over Christmas, New Year, but because there's not enough water in the lake, we hardly have any people over that period of time. It's also affecting, the bird life and everything around here. The whole town is feeling the effects of the lake disappearing.
Like you could sit there in a place like that with a line in there, and you could see them coming through the reeds. You could see the reeds moving around. And you drop a line in front of them, and just that far in the water, and you'd get whatever it was, tench, a redfin or an eel. Now, probably for 2 or 3 days before you get an eel, which is ridiculous. That's another thing. In my younger days, there was oodles of tortoises, 2 different colours, a yellowy coloured one and a grey coloured one.
in many ways, it's quite exquisite watercourse. It's beautiful. some beautiful holes and things, and still platypus well up the creek. And it is of profound importance to Lake Bolac, of course, because it's the only way that the lake can get filled. And in recent times it's been an issue because the lake's been drying up, and so there's been a lot of questions asked about why isn't the water coming in and stuff.
In the early days of our group, there were people that thought they were getting a raw deal, and for instance, the ones in Lake Bolac thought that whatever was happening, and I go back to the thing that the farmers were using all the water, and that's why Lake Bolac was drying up.
They take water out from further up, which even just for doing the main roads, they take heaps of water out from the Fiery Creek. And of course, that has to affect us.
We've also discovered that there's quite a substantial amount that's taken off the headwaters for the Beaufort water supply, and so usage has probably increased on the way down, and now there's very little of it getting to Lake Bolac.
Well, we proved, we didn't just come up with ideas overnight, we actually proved with some of our research that the reason Lake Bolac was drying up is the water wasn't flowing in. The water wasn't flowing in because there wasn't any. There just wasn't enough water. Farming practices had changed.
It's definitely a contributor, because with modern agricultural practices the water's conserved in the land instead of running off.
Water infiltration through the soil is much bigger in the cropping enterprise, and we've seen our dams all dry up, and even in normal runoff events don't happen for us anymore from the cropping paddocks. Yeah.
See, even the block we're on, there's only about 80 acres of that ever been ploughed when we came there. Well, there's a gully just below the house, and I used to get on the pony to bring the milking cows across, because you could be wet up your waist to wade through it, and that used to run like that for weeks on end, and I think it's flowed twice since. That was about 30 years ago.
The landscape history of the Fiery Creek catchment is really interesting. So about 5 to 8 million years ago, there was a period of earthquake activity through that area, and then there was a whole series of volcanic eruptions going right through to quite recently that basically flooded the landscape with basalt and filled in a lot of the original irregularities. So you end up with this big, more or less flat volcanic plain. And so the current course of the Fiery Creek across that plain is really determined by the irregularities in the basalt landscape. The groundwater in the basalt feeds the creek. So rainwater falls on the ground, and then it seeps through the soil very slowly and ends up in the groundwater. And as it seeps through the soil, it's subjected to evaporation and also water use by plants. There's a series of springs along the creek, and these are where groundwater seeps out of the basalt into the creek.
The impact of cropping in the whole district has been enormous. The rise of cropping's been seen to be more profitable, and in many ways it's easier to manage than to manage livestock.
Cropping areas have sort of gone from being very intensive with a lot of tillage to no till, really providing the ability for one labour unit to sort of manage a couple of thousand hectares of crop, whereas the equivalent in livestock would probably require 3 full-time employees, sort of thing. So with declining labour availability and increased profitability from cropping, it's been difficult to say no for a lot of people around.
Cropping aims to produce a highly productive monoculture. It's not about biodiversity, it's about productivity. And these are two extremes on the one continuum. Where you have high productivity of a single species, you don't get a high biodiversity. And it's a good way to produce food for the world. And Australian farmers do it really well. But this region has a really high density of very shallow wetlands, and wetlands that frequently dry out. Probably 90% or more of the biodiversity on farm is in the wetlands. There's not just tens of species in the wetlands, there are hundreds of species in the wetlands. So if you remove wetlands from the landscape, you're removing a lot of that biodiversity.
This is my mum's country, my grandmother's country, my great-grandfather's country, my great-great-grandfather's country, and I can go back over 1,000 generations. This is their country. They give me my identity. This creek, this yallock, defines who I am. Because this is the edge of my country. If I go over that side of the creek, I'm on Tjabwurrung Country.
Well, my granny's land came from the, you know, right down probably to this area from Mount Williams. When I cross a boundary and I cross the creek, I pay my respects to my ancestors, you know, and I pay my respects to the land when I cross that into my boundaries. And I always do that. That's me. And that's the way, you know, like, as I appreciate it, you know, every part of a bit of land I walk on is sacred to me.
Fiery Creek extends all the way up to Mount Bolac. Just beside that is a place called Landcare. That was an important meeting place. To get there, families down this way would follow the creek along. The creek provided food, water, medicines. We knew where the creek went. So we knew if we followed the creek, if we've travelled along it, we would get to the destination we wanted to go to. So,
you know, it was a source of food. You know, when you imagine this creek at its full, you know, it probably wouldn't have been dried like this. See, there's duck life and everything on there. You know, if you want to catch a duck, you put a net across or make sort of a net and get the wommer winding, and the ducks will fly low and they might